see my face. Join us live on YouTube and Instagram, or YouTube and Facebook. Actually, we are live right now, and we're talking about a very important topic, and that is putting children. Yeah, I got no script at the moment. Putting children first in high conflict co-parenting situations. And I'm joined now by family therapist Ayanda Tetyana. Good morning, Ayanda. Welcome to Urban Woman on Radio Al Ansar.
Good morning, Salam.
Alaikum.
The network was just not allowing today. I really wanted to join you live in studio as well.
Oh, it would have been so awesome, honestly. But, that's what we call technical glitches. It's okay, as long as we can hear your voice and as long as we can still navigate this very important topic. So we're talking navigating.
Absolutely.
Yeah, co-parenting after a separation, it can be one of the most emotionally challenging experiences for any family, especially when tensions remain high. But what if there was a way to reduce conflict, set healthy boundaries, and still ensure that children feel supported and secure? So that is what we're chatting with Ayanda Tetyana, who is a family therapist. We're talking about that. Now, Ayanda, there's something called parallel parenting. For listeners who may be unfamiliar with the term, what exactly is parallel parenting and how does it differ from co-parenting?
Okay, so first I just want to say, in the reality is after separation or divorce, we have to continue the role that is the parenting part. Yeah. And usually as people who would have been, together in that relationship, we need to almost like navigate those tricky situations, those emotions, whatever your disappointments, whatever your frustrations, and in being conscious to say, okay, just for the sake of our children, let us continue to have civil relationship with each other. And to be honest, sometimes it's not realistic, especially just after the separation. And there's been a whole lot of things that have happened. But as adults in the situation, we have to be so conscious to say, in order to make sure that our children get the best, our children feel like they're the ones who matter the most in terms of their well-being, just in terms of their mental health, they are not messed up by whatever's happening with us. So when you talk about parallel parenting, you almost want to compare, I like to use it in this way. If you're co-parenting, what's happening is between you and the other parent, even if maybe there's been a separation, you're basically parenting together. There's a collaboration. Someone else will drop the children at school in the morning, someone else will pick them up, or as a parent, maybe today it's my turn to pick the children up, but something has happened. I'm able to talk to the other co-parent, and we just have this beautiful, seamless relationship that always puts the children at the center, right? But with parallel parenting, when we bring that up, it's usually when it's a little bit more harder, it's a little bit more chaotic, and maybe, some of the wounds are not completely healed between us as parents. And what we do is we try and have as minimal contact as possible between us. So everything needs to be structured. You don't think about like very business-like, almost like board meeting vibes. If you want to communicate, you're sending an email, you're sending a WhatsApp, you make sure that in that WhatsApp, you're removing emotions as much as possible, but you're focusing on making the point. For instance, if this weekend, you're not able to pick up the children, or if it was your turn to turn to have the children over, you basically just sending a message that's very clear that's saying, listen, I'm not going to be able to take the kids this weekend. Can we switch that around? You're going to be very direct and clear in terms of your communication. And most importantly, we don't get involved in what happens when the children are at the other family, at the other parent's house.
It's so important. Thank you for breaking that down, because, I think we can all resonate with the co-parenting, since you brought in that collaboration, because everybody's now doing collab social media. But, parenting is obviously so much deeper, because it's not just surface level. We're dealing with lives that are basically looking up at you. You are their everything. You are their role models. And through observation, children actually learn. So share with us, Ayanda, why is parallel parenting? I mean, we can know like parallel is side by side. Why is
Yeah.
it becoming such an important approach in today's high conflict family situations?
It's because we understand more than ever how important it is that the environment that our children are brought up in is safe and secure.
Yeah.
You know, our children misbehave and act out at school because things happen at home. Our children don't keep up with their academic work at school because mom and dad were having fights. And maybe, to be realistic as well, we are just not maybe staying in our relationships longer if we find ourselves in situations where we're very unhappy. So, the idea would be, with all of that being said, despite the challenges between us, how do we ensure that the children actually can walk out every day to go to the school and not feel like they're, for instance, the reason why their parents are fighting, not feel like, everything is going wrong and they have everything to do. They've contributed to all of that mess and the chaos. And as parents, we are very intentional in saying we do not want that for our children. We want our children to still feel like they matter, that they're still the center of our universes. And sometimes maybe parallel parenting seems very extreme, but when we think about our children's well-being and the bigger picture and just making sure that they can go to school, they can come back, perform the best that they can, and not even know what is happening between us as parents, it's basically the best option that we have.
Yeah, and I think, you know what, that is their basic right, because they didn't ask to come into this world. So how can we give them the most healthiest support system ever? Now, Ayanda, we're actually talking about children, but we know that when there's separation, obviously, because things did not work out, it did not go according to plan before the whole union of marriage. And so, what would you say? How can parents actually manage their own emotions when there is still hurt or anger towards the other parent? Because what you find is, the one parent may tell the child, you're just like your father, or you're just like your mother, and that poor child is so confused, like, what are you talking about? So how do we deal with that in a healthy way and not become smaller than the child that we're actually addressing and projecting onto?
Yeah, so emotional regulation on our part is so important. When it comes to moving on from the parenting where we were together and now we are getting to this point, whether you're co-parenting or just doing parallel parenting, it's so important to remove your own emotions from the equation. It's important to pause, to breathe before responding, and make sure that you don't react from a point of anger, from whatever past wound that you have.
Yeah.
So I always say, sometimes you kind of have to almost bring yourself to the lowest level. I want to say this. It's almost like you're making yourself a fool. But how you're doing that, you're saying, in the best interest of my child. When it comes to certain things that would have normally triggered you in the relationship, you're going to take a breather and you're going to say, you know what? This has got nothing to do with me. If something has absolutely nothing to do with your child's well-being, if something has to do with what happens in your parent, the other parent's household, for instance, you need to learn to differentiate, to say, listen, have those pep talks with yourself and say, listen, this has got nothing to do with me. I'm only responsible for what happens in my household. And the children will then deal with what happens with their dad or their mom, and they'll confront the situation themselves, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, it's so important. So again, we gotta definitely heal, allow ourselves to catch ourselves. So as you said, emotional regulation, and that really means, you said going to the lower self, that means really fighting that ego that wants to be right. I'm the right parent, I'm the good parent, I'm the one that's right. It's the other person's fault. But
hello,
can you hear me? Did we lose sound? Okay, Ayanda, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. All righty. So we are back.
Okay.
I see a message coming through, but I'll let the person complete their message. They're just sharing how they feel about the whole situation. Share with us, what impact does high conflict parenting have on children, and how does parallel parenting actually help to reduce that?
So, you're looking at making sure, in terms of parallel parenting, for instance, that there's predictable routines, there's emotional safety for your children, there's clear boundaries. A lot of our children struggle with things who are especially coming from situations where there's separation, where there's conflict at home. They struggle with issues of anxiety at school. They struggle with a little bit of level of PTSD. I think one of the worst things that I've seen in the work that I do is some of the children who even have somatic experiences where, the anxiety even leads to your stomach cramps, to your headaches.
Yes.
And I mean, our children get triggered by the most little things. Let's say there's just been a separation in our families and the child now is at school and they see mommy and daddy of another child being fetched, and the child is excited running towards their parents, and the child now remembers, oh my goodness, I don't have that anymore because my parents are always fighting. These are the things I always speak to parents about how important it is for us to have a sit down and really sit down with ourselves, Ravi, to say, how do we make sure that despite our ego, despite our, our hurt, how do we put the children first and make sure that they can move on in their lives, knowing that they mean the most to us, that we're willing to do whatever it takes to just give them that comfort and the security, and just knowing that they are loved by us. And that will look very different even when we're no longer together. Because unfortunately the role of parent doesn't change. We may separate and you're ex this, ex that, but the parenting role is parent forever.
Forever, absolutely. You said, I think that the important phrase that you use is that just knowing that they are loved by us, because essentially every single human is looking for this, and that is love. And if we don't give it to our children, then who is going to do that? They're going to look for it, obviously, in pathological ways. And they're so little, they're still growing like that tree. Ayanda, share with us, what are some common mistakes that parents actually make when trying to implement parallel parenting?
Yeah, so some of the mistakes that we make could be some things like speaking negatively about the other parent, using children to pass messages, and maybe even involving some of our extended family in our conflicts. That actually really doesn't help. What I usually say to parents, if you could find someone who has always been someone both parties respect, and I'll say this because let's say, for instance, there's a situation where you remember what I mentioned. I said there has to be very intentionality in terms of understanding that what happens in the two households you need to be mindful of only what happens in your household. But let's say something is happening in the other household that is impacting the child to the extent that, let's say, for instance, the school is affected, right? In those kind of situations, you want to find someone who's a third party, who's respected by both parents, if possible, who can then come in and have a conversation, But if you just bring anyone and then you just make the conflict worse, then that's not necessarily helping the situation. And then I also want to speak to just the most important, those egos or pride stuff that we have. And that's why sometimes I'll say you kind of have to like really hold your breath when it comes to things that would have normally triggered you maybe when you're in the relationship. And now you have to just take a breather and say, okay, how does this impact me? Is this about me or is this about the child? So you're almost like choosing your battles.
100%.
And then most importantly, when we're talking about the child's interest, we need to understand how important consistency is. It's important that our children have that consistency because this is all about the environment that they're being raised in. And when that environment is healthy and it's secure and it's safe, children will actually not even notice that there's been a huge change in their lives because they know that they still have that safety and they still have the security.
Absolutely. And they are our future leaders. So, how do you want them to grow up? And it's so important. In Islam, we actually encourage that we actually taught that the greatest battle is the battle within ourselves. So the battle of the ego. So we have to catch ourselves. Yes. So if you feel like you're just being reactive, go within yourself and say, is this about me or is this about my child? Now, Ayanda, some parents may actually feel perhaps like parallel parenting means giving up on the relationship. How would you respond to that?
Rosie, I would say that it's important to say, you're choosing peace. You're just choosing peace over conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not necessarily giving up, but you're saying, how do I make sure that my child's future is secure? And I'll always say this to parents, especially when we're in situations where there's been separation and all these things. How do we make sure that our children feel secure? Do you know, our children don't need a whole lot of money. Our children don't need these big houses, these expensive schools.
Yeah.
What they usually need is this amazing foundation where they feel heard, they feel seen, and they feel like they matter to us.
Absolutely.
So, in terms of just that bigger picture, in order for them to have the emotional stability, in order for them to not struggle with some of these psychopathologies, your depression, all of these things, I would say that it's so much worth it for us as parents to both be willing to say, how do we put aside our differences and say, for the interest of the child? And sometimes, to be realistic, sometimes it takes one parent starting to lead, even though the other parent is not necessarily on the same path with you, not understanding. You have to start leading with that and saying, listen, I'm going to be the one who leads by example. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to do all of these things. And hopefully with time, as both of you heal, you are then getting better and better at figuring out how to put your children first. The beautiful thing about our children is that as they grow, they are able to tell us exactly what they need from us. They're able to challenge us sometimes. And I think that also helps us. If we are too much of the kind of parents who focus too much on our own egos and our own, our little hurts that we're always carrying around, your children will call you out. And I think it's important that even in those situations, when your children do that, you have to listen. If your child says, listen, I do not like it, I feel uncomfortable when you're always shouting and fighting with my dad or my mom, you need to take that as a sign to say, I need to do something different. Because as I mentioned earlier, what is this whole parenting about? It's about making sure that our home environments are conducive for these adults that we're trying to bring up, for the leaders that we want tomorrow. And if you were to think of a garden, that parenting is a garden, what we are doing is we're nurturing the soil, we're trimming the leaves, we're watering, we're doing all of these things. And both parties, in terms of the parents, have a responsibility to do that, even when we're no longer wanting to be in the same relationship anymore with each other.
Indeed. You can go on, and I think it's such an important topic, and it's definitely something that we all need to make notes on. Essentially, it does come within us to identify our wounds and how we can heal, but the most important thing is that we put our children first. Ayanda, we thank you for your time. Due to time, we're going to have to wrap up here. Thank you so much for sharing such important information and also where the focus should be and what is our priority, being the parents, being the adults, and knowing that we got to lead by example and not become younger than the children, that we're actually trying to implement good morals and ethics and character and instill that great upbringing. It definitely begins with us, and we've got to be the change. As Ayanda said, that it doesn't matter if the other person isn't there yet. Be the change. It starts with you, and inshallah, that ripple effect will come. And we thank you for your time. Until we connect again, have yourself a lovely day further, and bye for now.
Thank you. Yeah. Bye.
And we had a message that just got deleted. I was about to read it, where the person said that they feel really sorry for children that are actually going through this here. And it's all deleted now immediately. I was going to read it. Anyways, let's go for a break. I'll be back with you in a bit, inshallah. I hope we take some good advice there. I hope we learn that we know more children. If we chose to get married and we chose to have children, then we adults and we have an amana. The children are an amana. You have financial responsibilities. You have all sorts of responsibility. We see the times now where sadly, the couple's divorced, and then the father no longer wants to be responsible for his very own bloodline because the mother decided that this toxicity is no longer good for myself and my children. So then he remarries, and then he then takes care of those children, and then yet the bloodline then starts to obviously being neglected. And it's so sad. There's just one situation that we're aware of, and there's so many out there. But at the end of the day, we're going to be accountable to Allah Azza wa Jal, and I think that's where our focus should be. In this situation, what is the right thing for me to do? How will I answer to Allah? This is my amana, this is my responsibility, not how the other person chose to leave me and then my ego. Because sometimes not being together may be better. So again, it's what's best, what is best for the children. And inshallah, take it from there. It is time for a break. The time is flying, 11:51. I'm Razia Language. I'll be with you in a bit. Do stay tuned.
Every day I'm trying to be as true as I can to you, 'cause loving you the best I can.